What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Gen Z Money Podcast, where we turn financial peace to your reality. I'm your host, James Bowman, and today we brought back an amazing guest to kind of tag team this whole budget talk, this track your spending. I brought back Mr. Joey Snyder. What is going on, Joey?
Hey, James, thanks for having me back. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely, man. You don't understand how much I really enjoyed the conversation we had last time. And I can see in the podcast downloads that other people are also enjoying the conversation we had. They must have learned a lot because you're the number one episode on the podcast so far, man.
Well, hopefully we can have two of them with this one too.
Absolutely, man. And I think this one is super duper important, right?
Yes.
Like I noticed that every time I bring guests on the podcast, one of the major things that they all talk about is a budget.
Yes.
Right. And so if I talk about budgets every single podcast, it only makes sense to actually teach people how to build a budget.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I'm pretty sure you've got a little bit of experience. You might have built a budget like once or twice, right?
Absolutely. Maybe, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and let's just get down to the basics, right? What does it mean to track your spending?
I think if you remember the last podcast, we talked a lot about the correlation between finance and fitness. It's the same thing. Finance gurus or people in that industry talk a lot about tracking, whether it's your reps, right? Whether it's your workouts, whether it's your micros and macros. It's literally the same concept when it comes to budgeting. It's just being religious with how you're going about where you're relegating the funds, but also understanding just how much you're spending, right? A lot of times I find that it can be liberating, especially for couples, to go through the budget and actually start to look at where is their money going. I'll use myself as an example. First time I really did a budget for myself, we had this online tracking software. I realized I was spending a lot of money at Buffalo Wild Wings, which is a pleasure, right? There's obviously no reason for you to spend hundreds of dollars at Buffalo Wild Wings. And so after I even just simply realized that by just seeing it on paper, I was like, okay, I need to maybe take a step back and realize what I'm doing because I could certainly be putting that money elsewhere. Obviously, I think with people also, they look at budgeting or spending and say, well, you're telling me I can't do something. And that's usually the perception people will have is, oh, well, Joey, I don't want to give you a budget or I want to be honest or go through because I don't want you to tell me that I can't go to Buffalo Wild Wings or I can't spend this. That's not the point of the spending. The point is to just get a grasp of where everything's at. And then from there, start to prioritize and see, how do we start to segment this into kind of layers of priority? Of course, obviously your fixed expenses, right? Those are mandatory. Your mortgage, if you have student loans or something of that nature, and then you start to trickle down to things that maybe you can lean one way or the other, right? Maybe I only go out 2 weekends out of the month instead of 4 or something of that nature. So it's just getting it on paper first, and then starting to stick with something that you can agree on, and that is comfortable for both you, your spouse, and your family.
Yeah, and I think when you have that persona, it's like a budget is very restricting, right?
Yes.
It's telling me I can only spend this money here, and I can only spend this money here. Here's what people don't realize, right? You create the budget.
Correct.
Right. So all you're really doing is you're setting a plan for yourself. So if you know Buffalo Wild Wings bring you the most joy in the world, you can allocate for that.
Yep.
Right. All you're doing is Rachel Cruz has a great saying. It's like a budget gives you permission to spend.
Yes.
So if you have a budget, let's say you budgeted $200 a month for Buffalo Wild Wings, work's been crazy, you haven't been able to swing by. You look at your budget, you're like, man, I have $200 I still haven't spent on Buffalo Wild Wings this month. Well, that is your permission to go to Buffalo Wild Wings,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
It's not telling you like, oh, you can't because that money's supposed to go up. It's like, no, like you designated that money for that purpose. So
Correct.
That gives you permission to spend that money for that purpose.
One thing too that my wife actually does, we do a lot of, we try to spend any way we can, or save any way we can. And one thing we do is Kroger fuel points, and how you get a lot of Kroger fuel points to essentially get gas for free is by getting gift cards. So we actually kind of do our budgeting a little bit with the gift cards. So for example, Buffalo Wild Wings, she gets me a $50 gift card every month. And that's basically what I can do for lunches and stuff like that. Right. So not only am I using the fuel points that of course are going to help drastically reduce the cost of my gas, but then I could also have, it's in a physical gift card, right? So you know exactly how much you're spending. So even in that regard, you're being kind of held to that amount versus also if you're just putting it on a card every time, you might go back at the end of the month and be, wow, I actually only should have spent 50, but now I spent 200, right? So I mean, I don't expect everyone to go do gift cards, but that was the easy way that I found that works for me, or works for us, because we're, taking advantage of the fuel points, but we're also kind of almost setting the budget with the amount of gift cards we have that month.
Yeah, I love it, man. That's kind of like its own sinking fund, right? You put it on
Yeah.
a gift card, and that money, you cannot spend that $50 anywhere else, right? Like you
Yep.
said, I'm going to spend $50 on Buffalo Wild Wings. So you have no choice but to do that, right?
Yes.
So that's pretty extreme, but I definitely get it. And it makes sense,
Yeah,
especially when you're getting
absolutely.
other benefits with it.
Yeah.
So, all right, that's what a budget is. And that's why it's so important, right? You're telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. And I think it's the absolute base of anyone who is trying to start off on their financial independence journey, right?
Yes.
You'll never be able to go to a company and they're going to be able to tell you, like, I don't know how much we make and I don't know how much we spend, right? And so you shouldn't be able to go to a person that says, I don't know how much we bring in every month and I don't know how much we spend.
Yeah.
You have to document it somehow in order to begin all of the other things, whether it's saving, investing, or going down the road and doing those things.
Exactly.
So let's go into the meat and potatoes, right? Let's go over, we're going to break it down, budgeting 101 or track your spending 101. People don't like the word budget. So let's go track your spending 101.
All right. I like it.
Let's start off. How do you create a budget? Where should you begin, Joey?
So there's usually a handful of ways you do it. Now I think it's even easier, right? If you remember, of course, our parents probably used to have a actual checkbook that they used to have to balance. That was a long time ago. Now, most people have credit cards or at least online banking, right? So the first thing is go to your bank, your credit cards, wherever you're spending money through, pull all that data off the website. You could go and get your monthly expenditures. You could even get a full year report, especially now we're in tax season, right? So tax season, you would go back and look at literally your entire year's worth of expenses. And a lot of those online websites, whether it's your Wells Fargo banking or you're doing a Chase credit card, a lot of those already have kind of a budget breakdown of where the money was spent during that year. So that's an easy way to go grab the money first. Then from there, I like to use Excel files. I think putting it actually on quote virtual paper or in an Excel spreadsheet is the most cost effective or is the most productive for me, because it's like writing it down. When you kind of write it down, you remember it and it kind of sticks with you more. Other people do like to use online softwares like mint.com is an online app that you can get where you link up your accounts and it pulls everything. But I think once it's pulled there, now you kind of look at it. It's now the question, because what do I do with this, right? It's not as easy to start to navigate and build around that budget, I think, online like that, where it is when you're doing it and you're actually really starting to segment it out into an Excel file and get a better grasp of where everything's at, what's categorized. And then from there, now you have to start categorizing it. Okay. What's your fixed expenses? What's your mortgage? What are you bringing in? What are you fully expending? And then maybe look at that over at least a 3-month period. So even when I'm meeting with clients, I'll have them get all that data, but then I'll say, hey, in 3 months, after we kind of set up our savings strategy, let's reconvene. Let's see where we're at after those 3 months and how realistic was that budget we created, right? Did we overestimate? Did we underestimate? And then also how much of the money we quote designated for saving, are we seeing that that's dipping into our personal budget, right? And we're actually saving too much, or we really need to adjust our budget because we can't save as much as we want, or our ability to save is greater, right? And then we talked about opportunity cost last time. Then we don't want to be in a scenario where we see our budget keep going up or our monthly savings going up and it's not being saved. So it's also an ongoing. So I like the word that you use, tracking, because not just setting your budget and then moving on, you have to constantly track that, just like you're tracking your progress, whether it's something through work, whether it's fitness, like we talked about, going away in yourself. This is the best way. And the best way I like to track is also net worth. Assets minus liabilities. Net worth is the easiest way to truly track your progress along the next, not only year, but years to come, because it gives you the best representation of what your true quote score is.
So let's take it back for a second, because you said something absolutely phenomenal, right? There was a study that I read, and I'm gonna try and find it and link it in the show notes, but the number one reason that budgets fail is because people are not realistic.
Yes.
right? If you set a budget for yourself and you say, we're going to spend $100 this month on groceries. Well, I don't know about you, Joey, but between me and my wife, that's like a week, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's so
Especially for a
being
family.
extremely realistic with your budget
Right.
is going to lead you to be able to follow it to the best of your ability.
Yes.
And I relate that to anything in life, right? Being like, don't set a gym schedule where you're going to start off going every single day for 3 hours. Like, that's not realistic for you.
Exactly.
So after 2 days, you're like, I'm done. I mean, if it's smoking, right? If you're an avid smoker and you smoke a pack a day, and you're like, I'm gonna cut cold turkey. We all know that's not realistic. So maybe you go to 3/4 of a pack a day or half a pack a day and you wean off of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a part of being realistic is not starting like, okay, it's, March, I'm going to do April's budget. It's not starting going forward. It's actually going back, going to look, what did we realistically spend the last 3 months on groceries? What did we realistically spend on gas, transportation, oil changes, or, all those costs? What were, and using that as your baseline.
Yeah.
And then you can start sculpting and tailoring the budget to work more efficiently.
That's perfect. Especially now, being that we're close to the holidays, I'd actually go back and try to get November and December, because people say, oh, well, during the holidays, they kind of give themselves an excuse, right? It's the holidays, I'm going to spend more. That's fine. And you can, but just build that out in the budget over the whole year, right? Our wife will plan for literally our trips a year in advance so that we could build it out in the budget, because it's a lot to take on to get to, for example, November, be like, oh, I need an extra $1,000 this month. Not everybody can just go make an extra $1,000 that month to cover their expenses, right? So if you spread that out over the year and say, we know that based off our spending last year, we spent an extra, I don't know, $4,000 on traveling and holidays and so forth. All right, let's spread $4,000 over 12 months. It's, what is that? A little over $333.33 to be exact. Spread that out over the full year and just start to save that, right? And have it ready so that you're not also bombarded by a ton of expenses all in a couple months, and now your budget's just blown, right? So think of it realistically. I think that's perfect advice, James.
Yeah, and it's basically like this. Instead of trying to create this whole project, right? It's a lot easier to mold and sculpt something that's already been done than it is to create something brand new. So that's why I love that. Go back 3 months, look at it, and then tailor it to you. If you think we spent so much on groceries, we can cut back $50, then do that. Not just, oh, okay, $100 this month and that's it, man, because that's where it fails, right?
Absolutely.
So for me personally, right, when creating a budget, I like to stay realistic, right? And when you're being realistic, there are three things that you can spend money on. There are needs, there are wants, and then there are luxuries.
Yes.
So often I see that people confuse a luxury as a need. For example, I'm just going to throw out a random example. I don't want to get too deep into it because it's a car, right? Transportation is a need, right?
Yep.
But a G-Wagon is not a need, right? A 2022 Honda Civic is not a need. That is a luxury.
Correct.
So I break it down as a need is something you cannot live without. A want is something you can live without, but it brings much joy and simplicity. Exactly. And then a luxury is something people happily live without.
Yes.
And so when you break it down like that, and of course, guys, we're going to give a whole bunch of examples of each thing going forward, but understanding that not everything is a priority is, I think, the second key to creating a serious, realistic budget.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's start off. Let's go ahead and name some absolute needs, right? What are some needs you think, Joey, that everybody needs no matter what?
This is honestly a great question because what I always tell clients, build out your budget and do what I call emergency account, right? I always tell people we at least want to have it at a minimum 3 months of fixed expenses. Well, whenever I say that, they instantly say, okay, well, my budget's $11,000 or $5,000 a month. I need 15,000. So you're trying to tell me that everything you spend every month is an absolute need, that if you didn't have it, your life would just be over. No, that goes into that want and luxury, right? The only needs typically are, for example, if you have a mortgage or rent, if you have some sort of maybe like a, even a student loan, technically you could probably get by for a few months without paying it, but that's one that's kind of a fixed expense. But other things like food, right? Obviously you need food, certainly need probably electricity and running water. Those are some basic necessities that you have. I think when you're looking at your true needs, it really are those basic things: food, water, utilities, some of those expenses. When you even start to dabble into things like internet or your cell phone, that I would actually say is a want. So I know it might sound extreme and people might be like, wow, that's, but that's how you should also segment it, right? Is that at baseline worst case scenario, if something happens, I lose my job, or, we have to move and we're temporarily out of unemployed for a while. Those really are your quote minimum needs. So you should at least be able to fund and cover those. And those are things that I would say are non-negotiable, right? I'm never going to tell somebody you can't feed yourself. But like you mentioned, obviously get a grasp of where that food's at. When we say food, that doesn't mean going out to eat every day. You could go out and just, cook for yourself and so forth. That's a way to drastically reduce those costs. So I definitely would say that's probably my minimum needs.
Yeah, I love it, man. I think the four walls, right? Your housing, you need somewhere to live, right? That is an
Yep.
absolute need. Your transportation, right? You need a way to get to and from, not to and from the bar, not to and from your buddy who lives 2 states over, to and from work, right? Because you have to have income for a budget to work. So transportation to and from work is a need. Now,
And a
again,
bus is fine.
and a bus is fine. A bicycle is fine, right?
Exactly.
Like, don't confuse a need with a luxury. So just if your job is, let's just say it's 3 miles from your house, it is completely reasonable for you to bike to work. You do not need to go out and get a car payment and go buy a new car in order to do that, right? That's when you get into the luxury. And then you have your food. Of course, he said, we're not going to ask anybody to starve, but buying groceries, being able to cook is an absolute need, because you need energy to be able to go to work and provide. And then your utilities, right? We don't expect you to live without electricity. We don't expect you to live without water or gas if you have a stove or whatever. These are all absolute needs, right? This is everything everyone needs in order to live let's just call it a decent life. And then I love how you broke it down into the wants, right? We all lived at one point without a cell phone. Oh, yeah. Did it suck compared to today? Absolutely. It did. Okay. Some people need a phone for work. Well, if that's the case, you can always negotiate with your employer, however that works. It is not a necessity. Okay. It's a want. It's something that brings you much joy and much simplicity, but you can live without it. People live without it. Other things, cable, right? Not being able to watch TV. Oh, if I could lay on the couch and watch Netflix for an hour, I love it, right? It's not a need, right? And the same thing with internet. Things like internet cable, those are wants. Those are not needs.
There are programs out there. If you really are in a situation where you were just like down and out, I know there are, federal programs that would help you get internet. Cause like, for example, I know during COVID, right, there's people whose kids need internet because they had to do virtual class. There's programs that'll help you get that internet at least covered or partially paid for, so your kid can get the internet, right? At the end of the day, there are certainly other solutions if you're really in that sort of scenario, but typically you're exactly right. It's more of a want just because you want to watch Netflix all day than it is a need.
Yeah. And then a luxury, guys, this is anything else, right? This is things that just bring you happiness. Eating out, going out for entertainment, whether it's beaches or the show, movies, or things like that. Vacations. Everybody say, oh, I got to take a vacation at least twice a year. It's like, no, you don't. You don't need to, right? If you're up to your eyeballs in credit card debt and all that, you can sacrifice a year or two of vacations. And then personal spending, right? Things like buying clothing, right? Whatever your personal spending is, like at Buffalo Wild Wings, like you can sacrifice Buffalo Wild Wings to, your life won't be as happy, but it's not forever, right? It's for a short amount of time. So
And this is where you go back to the budget, right? You start going through this budget, and really you could essentially identify your budget by going through these. Goes to needs first. What are those? What number is that? Then to wants, then to luxuries. Well, if you get to luxuries and now you're $200 over your budget, you're going to probably want to cut down some of those luxuries, right? But also, this even goes into the previous podcast of just building up your net worth and saving. If you start to prioritize these things, you'll eventually build up assets, you'll build up net worth, you'll give yourself the choice to be able to go out and do those things, right? And also save. An example I like to use is my wife. She's very religious about our savings, but how she actually does is she budgets through having multiple bank accounts. So for example, we use USAA. Within USAA, she probably has easily 8 to 10 accounts within there, and it's free to have, so it doesn't cost you anything. But how she budgets it is say, okay, well, we know we're going to spend $2,000 this year having to go back home to our home state of New Mexico and take all the kids. So starting now, she's already segmenting money that she puts into that bucket every month, right? So we could have that luxury. That in mind, you have to also be flexible that something might come up. If maybe someone gets sick, or maybe your car breaks down, or something that derails your plan, you've been saving the money, but now we might just have to move it to a want or a need instead of a luxury, right? So that gives you that freedom to still have some of these things, but to have money to fall back on is why we need the budget. If you don't have this budget in place and you haven't started segmenting these areas where we want to save our money, one little one little kink in the plan here could just blow everything up, and then people kind of throw their hands up, say, oh, whatever, we'll figure it out later, and then just kind of go about their life and just derails their entire plan. So the budget with all these and identifying this way, I think people resonate with that better than simply just a number.
yeah, I love that, man. And you know what? Let me ask, I'll make a statement, right? So no, yeah, okay. I'll make an observation of what you just said, right? So let's use, for example, going to Mexico on a vacation for your family, right? And let's say the trip is getting closer, and you're getting to the point where you're not going to have enough saved at that point. It's okay to move things around, right?
Yeah.
But you wouldn't move your vacation ahead of your rent, or you
Correct.
wouldn't move your vacation ahead of your transportation. You might move your vacation ahead of eating out,
Yeah.
or going out to entertainment, or reduce your personal spending in order to meet that. And that's 100% fine. I go into that and I ask this question is like, how often do you suggest that somebody creates a budget?
Constantly. Once you create it should never stop. And I think that's the thing that people forget is it. In my opinion, once you start it and you get it set up, then it's kind of just on cruise control. From there, you just constantly track it, whether you're doing it on the Excel file, because like I said, you could import the data right to the Excel file, whether you're doing it on Mint, or whether you're doing it like my wife does through the bank accounts, constantly tracking it. So you should never really stop budgeting. It's just more a matter of what you mentioned, tracking, not budgeting. So just continue to keep pace of it. And like you said, as you get close to that vacation, you say, okay, all right, honey, well, this month, instead of going out on date night, maybe you guys do a date night every Friday or whatever it may be. We're not going to do date night because we know we have our trip, our vacation coming up. Like, save that money. We'll have a nice dinner when we're in Mexico, or when we go see our family. We know when we go see our family, most likely our parents are probably going to be cooking dinner every night, right? We won't have to spend as much, whatever it is, but start to plan these things out. It's that simple. It's just planning it out, right? It can help so much when it comes to just staying within that budget. And that's one of the biggest stresses we all know, right, when it comes to life in general is finances. So budgeting and having both parties, especially if you're married, on the same page, is really going to help you guys at least take that stress off of the table.
You know what? I love that, man. And I'm so glad that you brought that up. It's not creating another budget. All it is tracking the money coming in and going out. And when you said that, I felt, at least for me, that was like a weight lifted off of my shoulders. Because a lot of times when you think about a budget, for example, if you listen to Dave Ramsey, it's every single month, you're going to sit down, you're going to list out all of your expenses, all of your wants, all of your luxuries, and you're going to do that every single month for the rest of your life. And that seems I don't do that personally, but that seems very heavy, right? Like it's a task I have to do. But when you take your approach, it's like, no. You're not creating a new budget every month. You're just sculpting your budget. You know your rent is not going to change every single month. So you don't have to touch that part of the budget at all. You know that your vacation might change a little bit. So you might have to take a little bit from here and move it over here, but you're not creating a brand new piece every single time, whether it's every week, every month, every 3 months, or however. All you're doing is sculpting it, moving things around to make it work at its max efficiency. And I think that's a lot easier to digest than sitting down, starting from square one every single month, getting all your income and going through the categories.
And one thing to piggyback on that too, James, is that I think can help, because like you mentioned, that's a lot to take on, right? To literally sit down every month and you to spend hours going through this budget, especially if you have kids and so forth. One great piece of advice that my wife and I got was the idea of a business meeting. And in the business meeting is, you could do it however you want, whether it's monthly, weekly. What we do is our business meeting is every afternoon when I drive home from work. It takes about 30 minutes. We have 30 minutes where we're on the phone and we're talking about things that need to happen, whether it's budgeting, whether it's upcoming expenses, whether it's things like, okay, Joe, you have to go to this weekend to get this taken care of, or we got kids soccer, right? Do a business meeting with your spouse. It's something that has really helped us to be on the same page. Because it can also be overwhelming if you wait all month, wait at the end of the month, and then let's just say that one month was that's the Super Bowl weekend, right? Well, we're not going to budget on Super Bowl weekend. Why would we do that? Then all of a sudden it gets skipped. Then you get to the next one. Now you got 2 months of things you need to start to talk about, and it can be very overwhelming. So whether it's weekly, whether it's daily, carve out 30 minutes to an hour with your spouse, or if you're on your own, and just do a business meeting where it's all money, it's all business. It's not about laughing and joking. That's the rest of your life for. But a 30-hour long business meeting can absolutely help you guys stay on track.
Yeah, I love that, man. I love that. So, all right, Joey, let's talk to the listeners, right? Who they don't have a budget, they've got a tons of debt, they have no savings, right? Because that's the reality that people are living in right now. And so I want to be able to talk to those people and help them. Because we both agree that you should have some type of savings account, some type of emergency fund in order to escape the rat wheel, right? You cannot escape the rat wheel without having something along those lines. Yes. So where do you fit like a starter emergency fund in the budget when you're doing it for the first time?
I always have our clients, the first thing you do is your emergency fund is basically to be your designated savings. So let's just say hypothetically that I would say carve out 20% savings, build your lifestyle around the rest. So we haven't really established emergency savings. Let's take that 20% and let's put that just automatically check into savings, not going anywhere else, right? And even if it's a little bit maybe ambitious number, so let's just say you don't really think, looking at your budget, you think you could save 20%, that's okay, because guess what, the money's not going anywhere, it's just going checking and savings. So every month you get your check, let's say, just to keep numbers simple, your check is $1,000, you take $200, you move it from checking to savings, that's it, right? Start to help develop that consistency and seeing that money go away. Once you build up that emergency account, then we could funnel that $200. We built up the habit, right? Then we funnel that $200 towards savings or whatever it may be. So typically build it out within the budget if that's something you're strategically starting to save for. And, I always say at least 3 months or so of fixed expenses. I think it also is what helps you sleep at night number, because everybody's situation is different. You, of course, have to take into consideration. If you're a single guy, right, who's lives in the barracks and you're in the military, you probably don't need 3 months of fixed expenses. You'll probably be all right. But if you're have a stay-at-home spouse and 4 kids, maybe you do need a little bit higher budget, because a lot of things could possibly happen that could really start to build up on you. So that's a good general rule of thumb. But yeah, carve out that savings and start just checking the savings, nowhere else. Once we get to the emergency account, then we'll obviously, that's where the last conversation is with the previous podcast of then starting to see that money being saved. So I don't know if that answered your question, but kind of start with that first.
So what about those people? Because I used to be this type of person and my wife is currently that type of person. And it's a bad habit to have. What about those people who they do that, right? As soon as they get their paycheck, they carve out X amount of dollars for savings.
Yeah. Okay.
And then they end up um, misbudgeting or things come up that were unforeseen, and they have a habit of simply transferring it back, right?
Yeah.
And so, they're putting money in one day, but then they're taking it out a few days later.
Yes.
Like, what do you say to those type of people? Like, how do you kick that habit?
Well, see, that's where we have to have the honest conversation of going back to the needs, wants, and luxuries, right? It's very easy to start kind of set it up. And that's why we mentioned it's really the starting point. It's just identifying that number. Then from there, that's where we have to go through needs, wants, and luxuries, because there's basically three things when you're trying to identify, is my plan going to work? Either if you realize that you're overspending, you either need to make more money, spend less, or change your goals. All three of that's the only three options you have. So if you're spending more than you're making, can you make more money? That's probably one that most people can't do. Two is, okay, well, if I can't make more money, how can I essentially spend less, right? So going back, needs, wants, and luxuries. And the third part is change my goals, meaning maybe I need to change my mindset from everything. I need to do everything. Like you mentioned in the start of, I need to be able to do vacation, need to have Netflix, need to have Hulu, need to have HBO Go, whatever it is, and keep up with the Joneses. Maybe change our priorities of, I'm okay with just having Hulu, like saving another 30 or 40 bucks, because when you start looking at it, you're probably going to easily be able to carve off that little bit of money to start getting back to savings. And it's not drastically changing your life or putting you in a situation where you feel like you're just unable to do anything, right? So I think having a real honest conversation, whether you're working with an advisor, whether you're doing it on your own, you're working with your spouse, of what do we need to change, right? And that's why I like to do it, because sometimes it's a slap in the face when you realize that I'm saving, quote, trying to save, and I'm dipping into it every time. Something's wrong with the way your lifestyle is going, and we need to try to change it to start to restructure our spending so that you can build wealth, you can be in a situation and be successful and not live paycheck to paycheck. Nobody wants to live that way.
Yeah, it's stopping the bleeding before putting on the bandage. Exactly. It's like if your budget is bleeding, if the money is going out and you don't know where it's going, and then you have to stop the bleeding first before you can bandage it and let it to start heal, which is the savings.
Absolutely.
I will say, like, my rule of thumb when I'm coaching people, right, is I like to tell people, no matter what, right, you have to have at least $1,000 in a savings account per person in your household. So if that's just you, bare minimum. I mean, and it hurts me to say this because even that is unsafe, but when I look at the alternatives, I mean, it's the best of the worst case scenario. So absolute bare minimum, $1,000. Well, James, where does that money come from? That comes right after your needs, right? Yeah. Right after you've budgeted for housing, right after you budgeted for transportation, right after you have budgeted for your utilities and your food, every other dime. Okay, and you paid all of your minimum debts. Every other dime needs to go to your savings until you have a bare minimum of $1,000 per person in your household. If it's just you, it's 1,000. If you got just four of you guys, 4,000, so on. So absolutely, getting that out of the way, right? That's like a bare. It's not ideal, but it's better than the alternatives to have a start of emergency fund. Joey, where do you think people should factor in their debts into their budget? What priorities should they take?
So I think this is really where people can mess up in their budgeting. Is typically when people start to budget, it's because something has gone wrong. They're in a scenario where, wow, we have a lot of credit card debt. We're spending a lot more than what we're kind of, quote, bleeding, because we're probably overspending and spending what money that we're not making. So me personally, I do like to refer to it as a need, because typically most people are in a scenario where they feel like they can't get out of it, right? And maybe have to get to a point where they're filing bankruptcy. I mean, that's of course a very extreme, but one, it's a want to incur debt, because typically people are incurring debt to get something that they like, right? So like you mentioned, a luxury,
wait. I gotta stop you, Joey. Say that one more time, because that. You got run that back. Say that one more time. Say it louder.
So the idea is that people usually, when it comes to debt, it's a want to incur debt because they want to have a luxury, right? Like a car or something of that nature.
Yes. Yes. Okay. I'm
And
sorry.
I read a awesome article a couple months ago of this guy, a supposed billionaire, and he was talking about the difference between billionaires and just everybody else. And the idea was, when it comes to debt specifically, he was saying banks love really everybody minus billionaires, because when billionaires are going to incur debt, they're incurring debt to go purchase a investment or some sort of property that's going to increase in value, where the normal everyday American is buying debt that is costing them money, like a car, maybe something like a timeshare. I'll get off the timeshare thing, but something like a timeshare where now you're just consistently paying for a vacation you're probably never going to take again. So typically people are buying debts because it's a want, or luxury, not because it's a necessity. So that's why it is you're kind of intertwining those, because it becomes a need, because now it's something that you have to pay back, right? Where when you initially purchased it, it was just something that you thought would be a good luxury to have. So I do think it fits in the needs. And that's another one where we have to carve that out. And if you're in a scenario where your debt is becoming so large, especially credit card debt, that's a compounding debt, like we talked about in the last podcast, where that's building on top of itself. And if you're paying the minimum on a quote, what was a luxury but now is a need, it could really start to drown the budget. So that's where we're trying to find ways where you try to refinance it, try to get it paid off as soon as possible is going to be huge. But that, of course, incurs need to have a good credit score. So there are a lot of other factors that go into that.
Yeah, I love that. We are 100% on the same page, Joey, that fitting your debts into your budget, getting those paid off, those come before your wants.
Yes.
Okay. It sucks to hear that, but it is more important in order for you to build wealth and to pass something along to your kids. Like you might have to sacrifice internet. You might have to sacrifice cable. You're definitely going to have to sacrifice eating out, entertainment, vacations, personal spending. You have to sacrifice that if you're in a position where you have these tons of credit card debt, high interest car loans, payday lenders. Oh my God, payday lenders, right? You have to be able to sacrifice your wants. Luxuries are not even in the picture, right? If you're not willing to sacrifice your luxuries, you're listening to the wrong podcast. Yes. The wants is the hard part.
Right.
But I want to make something very clear that Joey said, right? Joey is not talking to the people who are absolutely doing the best they can and they can't even afford to put food on their table and they have to use things like credit cards or payday lenders, right? He's talking to the people who want to use credit cards or use payday lenders to go eat out, to go on vacations, to buy clothes, to do all these luxurious things, and even some wants, right? We all understand that, some people do fall on hard times, and sometimes you do have to go in debt just to make the bare minimum to your needs. And hopefully those people are listening to this podcast and they can pick up on ways to increase their income or, fix that situation, because that is a situation that is relevant, but that is the exception to the rule.
Yes.
Right. We're talking to the general public, the people who go get a credit card and they go out to eat and they don't pay the bill, or they go to Victoria's Secret and say, hey, you could pay $0 down a day if you just open this credit card. We're talking to people like you who are using it for luxuries and wants. Yes, right.
Correct.
So I just want to point that out, because a lot of people, I tend to realize a lot of people like to play the victim, right? They like to play the victim, like, oh, absolutely, I need a car to get to work, so I have to go get a $300 car payment. It's like, no, you don't. No, that's a want, right? You can go get $1,000 car and it'll get you from point A to point B, but you're not going to impress anybody.
I have a good friend of mine who probably has more money than the majority of people I've ever met. And this guy literally does nothing but buy like 1990 Fords and Oldsmobiles. And he has a ton of money, and he buys like the junkiest $1,000 cars because he sees zero value in that. And he understands that by me having this really cheap car, and right now he currently has no car, he just sold it because he values saving and prioritizes that versus having a really nice car sitting in the garage during COVID where you have nowhere to go.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it all comes down to like what you value in life.
Yeah.
Right. But you have to understand every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if you value driving around in the brand new 2022 Honda Civic that's $40,000, then you realize that comes with a $500 car payment, right? And to some people, it's worth it. And I'm not here to judge anybody, but it's not my lifestyle. And it needs to come. It needs to come in your needs category, right?
Yeah. And if you invested in yourself and you developed savings, you carved out your savings, you've been building that wealth and so forth, then you can afford yourself that luxury. But the key
Exactly.
word there is affording yourself that luxury.
Exactly. Exactly. So just to be very clear, right? Your debts come with your needs, right? It comes before all the eating out, all of the vacations, all the personal spending. You have to focus on getting those high interest debts, right? We're talking about anything. Let's just generalize anything over 10%, right? Your money needs to be going there.
Absolutely.
So we already hit on this a little bit, but let's just hit on it one more time, Joey. Where do you fit your saving and your investing into your budget?
I mean, I really wish that people would view this as a need. I understand that's not the case because that should be a priority because you know that at some point you're going to want to be retired. We can't just rely on Social Security to pay for our lifestyle when we're retired. You don't want to quote be a burden on your future kids or family. You want to not only save but be able to afford things in the future. So of course, I'm always gonna. I actually like to view that simultaneously. That's why I always say carve out the savings and build a lifestyle around there because then we know what that number is and kind of how we can start to work within that metric. But certainly, I think most people would probably fall on the idea that needs and wants would probably come first, and then from there it'd be between luxuries and saving. Ideally, we do them all, but I would say majority of people probably fall within there, knocking out their needs, their wants, and then probably after that comes your monthly savings. Um, but it kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier. The fact is, if you prioritize those your savings as a need, it will allow you to have mess ups or to have hiccups throughout the way and be able to not have to incur debt. Because we understand incurring debt whenever it's an absolute must have. We got to do it to be able to just float the bills that month. That's understandable. But if you also prioritize saving that extra money when you have it, right? So if I get we talk about the COVID when they're giving out COVID relief checks. Well, I know here in our neighborhood, we saw basically everybody's house all of a sudden get new grass, get new sprinklers, get a backyard patio, whatever it is, right? Probably almost everybody took that money and went and spent it, which is fine. But at least prioritizing a part of that to save so that if we start to fall in hard times or we start having to work again or we get laid off, you have some cushion to fall back on, right? So I wish that people would view it as a need, but I'm okay if you at least do need, want, saving, then luxury in
Yeah,
that
yeah.
priority. What do you think?
Okay. So I'm gonna say I agree with you, but I'm gonna play devil's advocate a
Okay.
little bit, right? So here's the thing. Here's the only flaw I see with your logic on placing it as a need. Because I can go 100%, I can say 100% certainty that debt comes as a need, right? Because
Yes,
you're actively losing money every month.
absolutely.
What I find when it comes to saving and investing is it's a very delicate dance between putting it in your needs category and putting it in your wants category. And the
100%.
reason I say that is because you hear so often that people will dedicate their lives to saving money, investing, building businesses, and stuff like that. And once they get to that finish line they thought, they're absolutely miserable because they didn't get any of their wants and any of their luxuries along the way. And
Absolutely.
so they made the sacrifices. So, and that's the only pushback I'm going to give on the need, because when I think of a need, it's like non-negotiable.
Correct.
And I think that only works if you set like for example, you suggest you set an absolute 20%, right? So
Mhm.
everything above that 20% is negotiable and it can go to luxuries and wants and things like that.
Yeah.
Where my approach is just a little bit different. It's like I don't really set a percentage. If you can make $100,000 a year and you can live off of 35 comfortably,
Yeah.
then I think only saving 20%, you're kind of hurting yourself. But
Yeah. Exactly.
that's
I
where we
agree.
differ. I mean, and there's nothing
I don't
wrong with
recommend
that.
saying more.
Yeah, yeah. And so I just think there's a really, really delicate dance
Yeah.
between putting like you can I would 100% agree if you say your 20% goes in the needs. If you're going to save above that 20%, you have to throw in your wants and your luxuries.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to be 100% miserable.
Absolutely.
That
I agree 100%. I mean, of course, we're talking kind of general now, and that's also one thing about when you really start to dive into planning and so forth. And, when we're working with the clients is everybody's situation is different. Like I do have clients who are extreme savers who are saving well over 50% of their salary, and they're providing all those needs, wants, and everything. And they, just have the ability to save that sort of money. But for most people, I guess my thing with the 20% was, it at least gives somebody a number to have in their mind to carve out and say, okay, if I make $1,000 a month, $200, I'm going to just try to save. Well, most likely you're probably right now you're saving that towards your debt, right? You're probably putting that extra towards your debt, or you're putting it towards your emergency account. So at least it's giving them some sort of amount that needs to go somewhere that's not a luxury just yet. Because I think if we can't even knock out the debts or build that emergency account first, we're in a much tougher spot and a harsher reality than what we think we are in. And I don't want people to then be like, okay, well, I'm going to just kind of float this debt, or float on really not having an emergency account to continue to go on vacation, and then I lose my job, right? So it's a fine balance for sure, and I'm 100% with you. I think there's a lot of people who talk about that, of where they sacrificed everything and worked so many hours where now they're 60 and they kind of regret it all. Or you're, I don't know, for example, military, right? And you're constantly going overseas so you can make more money for your family, but then you missed 5 years of your kids growing up, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, so there's definitely a fine balance there. I think I'd just like to give people at least a number just to set it as an example and a reference point to build a habit, right? Of making sure at least they're putting money somewhere that's not just being instantly spent.
Yeah, you know what? I need to backtrack a little bit, because I think I misunderstood when you first said it, because it definitely cleared it up. Your need, right? Your position on a need is that 20%. Everything above that should go to your wants, luxuries, and
Correct.
then excess is savings. Because I remember on our last interview, you mentioned that, like, at the end of the month, if there's anything left over, you didn't not get your wants, right? You didn't not get your luxuries. It was just whatever was left over after your wants and luxuries for the month, it went to savings.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like, I guess, yeah. So I misunderstood what you said, because like when I think of excess income going into savings, I think of everything, not just the first 20%. But I would 100% agree. Like, if you can get to that 20% and put that in the need category and still start going down your wants and luxuries, if you have anything left over, that's just gravy on the biscuit.
Yeah. And then you have the choice, right? You could save it because maybe we don't have anything coming up this month, or go spend it, go to Buffalo Wild Wings or go to Six Flags or whatever is close to you. Absolutely.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. So we hit on this a little bit in our past episode. We're going to touch on it one more time, because we did have a small conflict of interest when it came to this, but I just want to hit on your point one more time, because I talk about it every podcast. When prioritizing debts, right? In your area of expertise, you're using a lot of student loans at a certain amount of interest. So at what threshold do you recommend people paying off debt over the investing and saving?
See, I'm usually saying 7%, but I understand why you have a lower number than me. Mine's usually because typically the only debt that I'm seeing at that 6 to 7% range is almost always a student loan debt. And in most cases, I would actually view that as a good debt, because I don't think people should prioritize aggressively paying back their student loans at the expense of all what we just talked about, of savings and wants and so forth. All while, if you are somebody who maybe is a teacher and you incurred $100,000 of student loan debt, you have a loan forgiveness program to take advantage of currently. So in that case, don't prioritize it and go bust your butt paying that back for a loan that might be forgiven. If it's not, we have to pay it. It is what it is. But prioritizing a amortized debt, even if it is at 7%, typically it's usually a student loan. If it was something, I'm trying to think, maybe like a personal loan, like if you got a personal loan taken out that is at that 7% range, maybe in that scenario, I'd say, hey, you probably have to prioritize it too, because it probably has also like a 1 or 2 or 3 year repayment period anyways. So I think it does come down to it as to why I have a slightly higher threshold, but the majority of debts that people are going to see actually fit under your exact number. And that's what I was mentioning. Like, I think you and I are actually on the same page. It's just the number, I think, is really the difference, because majority of debts that we're going to see people have aren't even going to be at that number. They're going to be extreme credit card debt or probably a mortgage, right? Or something like that. Very rarely are they within that 6 to 7. It's almost only usually around the student loan numbers.
Gotcha.
So
So would you
I'm gonna-
say that the overall balance of the debt, because you compared like student loans to like a personal loan, and obviously those would be two separate sides of the extreme. And
correct.
you mentioned that you would go ahead and just suggest paying off the personal loan compared to the student loans. So does the overall balance of the outstanding debt influence your decision whether to pay it off if everything else is identical?
That and also the time horizon, right? If you have a personal loan and you know that it's has to be done with 3 years, then of course we're stuck there. But with the student loan, we also know we could leverage that over a longer period of time. So it allows us to take advantage of compounding interest and do the, squeezing the efficiency out of the savings. So saying, all right, well, rather than putting I don't know, 1,500 towards the loan in a 10-year period, I could do it in a 20-year period and put that money possibly elsewhere. And over time, I'm going to have more assets than debt or than debts will, right? So I think that does go into play. But also going back to the loan, forget the loans specifically with student loans. If you are someone who has a drastically large student loan amount and your income is pretty low, that debt to income ratio is going to, because of the programs that exist there, you actually going to have a pretty low repayment option anyways. And most, if you're at a 501c3. So I think that might be something that's going to go case by case. But yeah, if you work at for example, a private institution where you don't get 501c3 and your debt amount is pretty high, you're in a spot where you're probably gonna have to make a decision whether you're doing a private refinance or looking for some sort of loan forgiveness option. But that's something we talked about, where I think people also understand that taking out $300,000 of debt to go make 60 grand is a bad investment. We don't want to encourage people against education, but I think we want to make smart decisions when it comes to further investing in ourselves. There's nothing wrong with investing in yourself and going out and becoming, a nurse or a physician or, whatever it may be, but understanding what income level you're at and doing your best to minimize that debt. Unfortunately, debt is given out kind of at will, especially when you're in school. So people can incur a lot of unnecessary debt that actually goes back to what we talked about, the needs, wants, and luxuries. There's a lot of people who have a lot more debt just because during their time of going to school, they wanted some luxuries too. So they took out a little bit more debt than they needed to because they wanted to still be able to maybe travel or go out or pay for their car payment or whatever it may be. And now they're sitting at a job that's not even, making average American income, 50, 60 grand, and they can't afford to pay back a $200,000 debt, right? I think that's a whole other conversation on the debt, but yes, the amount does become important eventually. And I think that's something where you might actually need a specialized consultation with someone to really identify what are we going to do with this, because you might be in a tough spot if it's that high.
Gotcha. And yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. It's like when you're talking to somebody who has 20,000 compared to 200,000, there is no cookie cutter plan, right?
Yeah.
You can't just be like, this is the plan. Everybody needs to do it regardless of the amount, because there's other factors that come in like income growth potential and things like that. So yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head with that one. So let's go ahead and move forward. I really want to focus on luxuries, right? Because living in a third world country, we have third world problems, right?
Mhm.
So luxuries tend to be a third world problem. Like we don't necessarily worry about having clean water in most areas of the United States or where our next meal is going to come from in general.
Exactly.
So it's like, I'm going to ask this question, but then I'm going to follow up with it. It's like, how does the average person know how much they're allowed to spend on luxuries? For example, my rule of thumb, and it only works for the people who are shooting to build that generational wealth, right? Not just to retire decently, because you can retire decently with $500 a month into a Roth IRA from age 20 to 65. You can retire blissfully, and there still might be money left over for your children. But for me, and for hopefully the listeners of this podcast, we want to build wealth for our kids. And so when it comes to that, right, I have a rule is like, you can spend as much as you want on luxuries, but however much you spend on luxuries, you should also be investing that same amount or more. So what is your take on that? Like, when is too much luxury? Because you say the 20% savings carved out no matter what. So if I apply your rule to mine, then if you put 20% into luxuries, you can invest 20%. What is your take on that, like, as a rule of thumb?
Yeah, I actually use one of my mentors as a perfect example of this because he's definitely a person who has a lot of great luxuries in life. He's actually spent a lot of time. He actually was really into skydiving for a long time, does a lot of professional poker playing and stuff now. But he's given himself those luxuries because he prioritized savings and still does it, but prioritized it very early on and built, like you mentioned, the generational wealth. So I think it is hard. I like that rule because it's actually a good point of trying to match them up because I think that actually will give people almost an incentive to say, okay, well, if I want to have say $20,000 a year of luxuries, I really need to make sure at a minimum I'm doing $20,000 of savings, right? For those people who have that sort of surplus. So I like that metric because I think it gives you a something to shoot for. But I think in my opinion, it goes back first to carving out the 20% right away, or at least the minimum. I always say this just because it's a general rule for today. Typically, when we're meeting with clients, that's where we go into people's goals and say, all right, like for example, the other clients I mentioned, they really do want to prioritize trying to retire early and have a specific amount of money to be able to do certain things during their not only working career, but retirement. In that case, it really does require them to save closer to about 35%. Right. So when you're in a scenario like that, you can also then, when you are someone who has that sort of surplus, that's where definitely having an advisor becomes important because now you're saying, I'm not necessarily worried about covering the bills, right? Or paying for college education. Now it's how can I start to drastically build on my current wealth and stretch that out to be able to build not only generational wealth, but also have pay possibly a lot of great luxuries with that. So my scenario would be at least a 20, carve out the rest. And then from there, I would actually just take the rest, whatever you have left, and I would just save it because you probably already carved out your luxuries. So when you start looking at your budget, let's just for today's sake, let's say your budget's $10,000. Every month that's what you and your wife bring in. 20%, $2,000 saving goal. The remaining $8,000 you have the green light to go spend. Well, you realize, we're not really big spenders, right? Maybe we have one or two trips a year we plan for. We save for that throughout the year. We didn't realize that we're basically seeing another $1,000 a month that we're kind of not doing. And you're already getting kind of those luxuries. In that case, I would say continue to consistently save it. And then at any point in time, you can certainly designate that extra 1,000 towards maybe an additional luxury you want because you've already carved out your savings, it's taken care of. Or what I see a lot of people do is, like, for example, debt. Maybe you get 5-6 years down the road and you've been aggressively saving and you look back at your student loans and say, I've built up $500,000 in my brokerage account or my non-qualified investment accounts. I'm going to cut a check for 100,000 and pay off my debt now, because at that point you have that option because you know that what's going to happen. What's going to happen the day after you pay off that debt. You're still going to go save 20+% of your income. Nothing about your plan has changed, right? So that is what I call the ultimate financial freedom or financial success because you have nothing but options and opportunity at that point. So I would say save the remaining amount, and then from there you could constantly continue to adjust to what you're trying to accomplish. Or if you come up with, maybe you have the option to buy a rental house, you have those things. Fortunately for the average person, that's probably not as big of a luxury, and people are having to choose between luxuries and saving more. So but I don't know if that answered your question, but
no, yeah. Because I was asking, like, is there an apex? What you basically said there is, like, you can only spend so much on luxuries, right? Exactly. So once it's out of your system, then just save the rest.
Yeah.
And the point you were basically making is like, okay, let's just say 1 month you've got this complete excess of money, right? You can absolutely go and blow it, but the money is gone. If you save it, you can still choose to spend it at another time. Maybe a time comes where you don't have enough excess money and you can use that. So it's like, if you have to choose between spending it now and getting it out of your budget, or saving it and having it to use later when you actually need it, then the choice is pretty self-explanatory, right? It's because we all know, like, just as many good days come as bad days. So 1 month you might be out of work for the whole month, right? and you got your emergency fund, but your emergency fund, unfortunately, it doesn't cover your luxuries. Well, now your excess money you made, the excess money you carved out of your budget, now you still have it and you can use it for that luxuries. It's all about not living in the now, but living in the future.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah. So you definitely answered my question.
Yeah.
You definitely answered my question. So I'm gonna go into my personal budget, guys.
Okay.
And I'm gonna go into it personally, and these aren't absolute numbers, but this is pretty much a ballpark. So here's the things that are in my budget that are absolute needs. I have my mortgage, my car insurance, my electricity, my water, my food, and gas for the cars. All of those total up to $22.65 per month. Those are my absolute needs. So at this point in my budget, and let's just for this example, no, we're not even going to do an income. We're just going to go off of the expenses. Those are absolute needs. So if I'm in a predicament where I have some if I have some credit card debt, or if I have some payday lenders, or if I have, some type of compounding bad debt, after that 2265, I live off of that 2265. Everything else in my budget, let's just use $4,000 for an example. Let's say I made $4,000 a month. That leaves a little under $1,800. That means $1,800 a month is going towards that debt. Now, some people may think like, that's crazy, that's ludicrous. Why would you do that? But you have to understand what you're giving up by having the credit cards and things like that. You got anything you want to say on that, Joey?
Oh, you're preaching to the choir, man. That's you could not put it better than that, because also look at how much that shows your true ability to save. Mm-hmm. You're almost saving just as much, on that example. If you make 4,000, your needs are 2,200. You're almost saving just as much as your needs. So that goes into what's crazier is the fact that you think that somebody would look at that and be like, I'd rather just keep carrying my credit card debt instead. Where you could pay $800 a month and probably knock it out pretty quickly, right? So when you look at people's true ability to save, they probably have a lot greater ability to save than they really think. So I love the way you're breaking this down, because it shows people what you could really live off of and how quickly you could see debts get paid off or wealth be accumulated.
Yeah, and the reason I use these numbers, right, is because $4,000, that's $48,000 a year, and that's about the median income of a household in America, right? So, I'll say I live in Savannah. These are my real life expenses living in Savannah. So the total of my real life, my mortgage, car insurance, everything I need to live, that comes out to $26,500 a year. That's eating what I want from the grocery store, right? That's using, and that's not like I'm not using the heat. That's my full electric bill. I take baths. So my water bill, that's my real water bill. So am I really sacrificing anything in my actual life that, whatever. So, and that's $26,000 a year. So those are my expenses, my need expenses. That's the most important number out of this whole example. Then I go down to my wants, right? After my credit cards are all paid off and I'm good on debt, let's just say after 3 months of just living out there, I have no phone for 3 months and no internet for 3 months. Did I survive? Yes. James survived in this example. Now I go down to my wants. What are my wants? I want my phone for my wife and I. It's $150 a month, and internet $70 a month. That's $220. Add that to my needs. Now my needs and my wants are about $2,500 a month. That is, let's see, times 12. That's $30,000 a year. That's living on everything we need and a couple wants. Everything else, the other $1,500 a month, can go towards luxuries and savings.
Yes.
So if you go by my rules, then $750 is going to go towards luxuries and $750 is going to go towards saving and investing,
which is almost 20%.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we go off of your rules of the 20%,
$800.
That's $800. So the difference, the real difference is $100 a month, right? And it's It's crazy how that just worked out. We didn't plan that, by the way, guys.
No, I'm just about to say, I was like, we're on a whole different level. Didn't even think about
Yeah. And so
it.
these are actual realistic things. So now you can spend $600 on luxuries a month. What does that mean? That means you can go out and eat. You can, I pay for lawn. I consider lawn care a luxury because I could go out there and cut it on my own. But listen, hey, don't judge me. All right. So I
Hey,
consider
I'm the
that a
cheapest man
luxury.
alive. I cut my grass. I refuse to pay for it.
Hey, look, man.
A lot of people do.
I look, that's a luxury for me, man, because
Yep,
it's hot out there. I'm in Savannah.
I'm with
And
you, especially in Savannah.
yeah, so it's like looking at like this is real life examples using the actual median income and living. Savannah is not a cheap area to live in by no means, right? There are much cheaper areas, but we still, because we live within our means and we prioritize saving so much, we're able to create that spread. And I'll go ahead and say I make more than my household makes more than 4,000 a month. So that was just an example. But our luxuries end up being $1,000 a month between personal spending, eating out, all of our subscriptions to lawn care, pest control, all that stuff. It averages out about $1,000 a month. That means by my rules, I'm saving and investing at least $1,000 a month. And that's where I want everyone to be. I don't, if your luxuries are $300 a month, I want you to be at least 300. By Joey's, if you're 20% of whatever your income is, just save it. And the rest, you do what you want to do with it. But the point of that example was separating your needs, recognizing your needs, recognizing your wants, and recognizing your luxuries, and building your budget around that, building your savings and investing around that.
Even on this example you're using, James, even if you were to say that you're going to have $1,000 luxury, right? That's still $3,500 total. That's still $500 you could do to a Roth. So where I'm going with this is there is zero excuse that if you make normal, just American average income, that you can at least max out your Roth and give yourself basically $2 million almost at retirement if you start when you're in your early 20s. So there's just, so it goes to the idea that especially when you start to budget out and you look at this, you're either, if your numbers aren't matching with this, someone's either just drastically overspending what you are. And so of course, let's get a check on that. But your true spending is, and one thing I tell people this all the time. As I mentioned, I work with a lot of physicians, and of course, physicians start with being from, they're making about $50,000, $60,000 in residency, then they instantly transition to practice making a six-figure salary. And there's a study that showed that people, if they don't make the appropriate savings adjustments within 6 months of getting a new income, your lifestyle is going to naturally absorb that income. So going to this example, if you don't just go automate $500 a month to Roth, that $500 that we know technically we're not spending, your lifestyle will naturally absorb it. So eventually you'll say, okay, hey, I'm going to, instead of doing lawn care, I'm also going to see if maybe they'll fix the front yard and do some, pretty rocks in the front, right? Because you're going to start to see that money is actually still sitting in your checking savings and is building up, and then you just find a way to spend it. And you're doing that unconsciously, not even knowing, because we haven't carved out that savings like I talked about, right? So make the point to carve out that savings and do all these simultaneously. And even on a lower income, the $48,000, which is most people are making that, you could still at least do your Roth IRA. No excuses.
And that's going to make you a multimillionaire, depending on when you start. Like the math, just the past performance doesn't indicate whatever the saying is, right? So yeah. So it's like, let's go off of the past. Like you can become a multimillionaire with $500 a month using my example. And that's investing half of your luxuries.
Correct.
So if my luxuries are 1,000 and I have 500 left over, I can still become a multimillionaire at that time of retirement just from a Roth IRA. But you know what? I have to go back, right? Because you said something and you got my blood boiling now, Joey. I want you to talk a little bit about, because I got into it on social media with someone, and there's no fault of her own that she got really, really offended when I said there are broke doctors. And she completely went into hostile mode saying like, I can't believe you talk about doctors like that. And she just got really, really defensive because she's in school to become a doctor. And she didn't understand that um, just because someone is disciplined for 8 years in school, that they and they're like world renowned in the medical field, that that discipline transitions over to finances.
Yes.
And I was trying to explain to her, like, look, there are broke doctors, there are broke attorneys, there are literally, I interviewed Joe on episode 16 of the podcast, there are broke financial advisors. So it doesn't matter how much you make, it matters how much you spend.
Yeah.
And she just completely, she was not hearing it. She's like, no, doctors cannot be broke. They go to school, they have the discipline. Why would they go do this? And shout out to my brother, because he pulled up an article on the Post just explaining the reasons why doctors can go broke, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to, they're so used to living on debt, delayed gratification. Once they actually get money, they end up saying. So can you just talk a little bit? I don't want you to go too far into it, but I just want you to talk to the people who have that mindset. Like, once you make a certain amount, you can't be broke.
Once you make a certain amount, you can also overly indulge, I should say, right?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect example, we'll just leave it at this. I met this was actually a dentist making, just so you know, a lot of private physician, or a lot of private owners of dentist practices actually make a lot more than the majority of physicians. So he's making easily 700,000 plus. This guy and his wife have matching Ferraris. And when I met them, they were 45 and had easily less than 300,000 in total assets. Are they broke? Probably from the perception of other people, no. Do they have a nice lifestyle? Yeah. But are they going to build wealth to maintain that sort of lifestyle for their entire duration of their retirement, or be able to retire early? No. So a lot of times it's not that they're broke, and I think that's probably what she's thinking is they just, people in general, doesn't matter whether you're a physician, dentist, attorney, whatever it may be. Sometimes people can just make bad decisions when it comes to the money, just because, same thing, they have money, eventually their lifestyle absorbs their income. So it's not a fault of their own. And I have a lot of clients tell me all the time, I've been trained in medicine for the last 8 years. It's just been crammed down my throat. Not once did I get a financial planning course. Right. So a lot of times too, higher net worth individuals, with all people making, 6 figures, usually will stick to their core competencies, which is, medicine or dentistry or law, and then outsource the rest. That's why they go work with advisors and other professionals to help them build their wealth together, and make that a priority. Right. So anybody can certainly be, quote, broke. I think it's just making the point to not only start, but then it goes into the time horizon. I always refer to it as the medical squeeze. And the fact is, everybody is also starting later. So we talked about the time horizon thing. Well, if you're not starting until your early 30s at saving, then you prioritize maybe paying down debt for the next 10 years. Now you're 40, you have zero assets to show. Yeah, maybe your debt's done, but you know what people don't want to do is then turn around and take all that money they were drastically putting towards debt and save it. No, they want to eventually go have a nicer home, have a car, and kind of live the lifestyle they obviously wanted and envisioned for themselves when they got into the idea that, yes, I love, my career because I love what I do, but I also like the income that comes with it, right? And that's something that you certainly can see people make a mistake where they just don't prioritize doing them simultaneously, like we're talking about now. So it doesn't matter what your surplus is. I also have physicians that are making, significantly lower than, for example, you could have neurosurgeons making close to $1 million, and you could have internal medicine docs making 200,000. And I can tell you from personal experience that I have a couple just internal medicine physicians that have tenfold the amount of assets that a neurosurgeon client of mine has, just because they prioritize savings. Not that either of them are broke. They just prioritize the way they save and spend their money differently.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, the reason I wanted you to talk about that is because she's like, well, why don't you name a broke doctor? I'm like, well, you actually know.
Introduce her if you want.
Yeah. So like you know broke doctors, and you're in this, like you do this for a living. Like you said that you primarily talk to physicians and higher education. And the point I was trying to make to her is like, one, it's not about how much you make, it's about how much you spend. Right? If you make $200K a year and you spend $250, you're broke, or you will end up broke. And
I think people's definition of broke is different too. I think us as a society, we think broke as in the example I used in the podcast last time of my client who mentioned she'd only get 2 hard-boiled eggs for Christmas, right? Or her birthday. When people think of that, that to them is broke. But there's different versions of broke. If you're someone who's made, even if you make $10,000 a year for the next 30 years and your income never goes up, that's $6 million. If you're someone who made $6 million during your 30-year working career, and you don't have generational wealth to show for it, in you and I's opinion, I would view them as broke. But they might not feel broke, or to someone else's perception might not be broke because maybe they have a really nice house, right? Or they have Audis in the front, right? So I think the definition to us is different when we say broke. She probably maybe was thinking that broke man, they're homeless, right? No, there's not homeless doctors. I mean, I guess if they did something illegal and lost their license, but I don't know any of those people. But typically they're not broke. They just aren't necessarily financially, fiscally, maybe at the assets that they're at. And the last thing I'll use is I remember a client telling me, or prospect, I should say, that he didn't want to prioritize saving or getting insurance because he had a attending physician he worked with who was 72 and worked in a wheelchair. And my exact answer to him was, do you think he wants to work in a wheelchair at 72 years old? I don't think so. He probably has no choice because he might have just made bad decisions. Maybe he does. Maybe someone would want to work in a wheelchair up until their early 70s, but I don't think that's what most people's view of financial success or independence is, right? So yeah, it's certainly a different, I think we have a different definition of what we call broke too, especially when you're looking at having that sort of discretionary income to save. The amount of assets and how quickly you could see that money grow is almost unvaluable to the average person.
You know what? I love that you know what? You kind of did humble me just there, because my definition of broke is that, right? Like if you're making $200,000 a year, there is no reason you shouldn't be saving $100,000. And that's to me, but my standard is much different.
Everyone does though.
Yeah. So you know what? I respect that. Everybody does have their own definition of broke. So yeah, that definitely makes sense. But it's great to hear it from the person who's in this and they're dealing with it every single day. They're seeing it every single day.
Absolutely.
Because I'm not talking to physicians every single day, and they're not going to come and tell me like, hey, I don't have anything in retirement at age 58. They're not going to just come tell me that, but they'll tell you that, they'll show you the skeletons in the closet. So to conclude the show, guys, I want to bring up a couple things on things that were not in my budget. And I'm going to ask them to you, Joey. You just tell me where you would fit them into the budget, right? Okay. So things that weren't in my budget that in general, people will have. Child support.
You probably need, just because you probably don't want to have the possible legal things that could come with not giving child support. So you probably have to call it a need. But this is where it could really get, dicey, because, that number could be drastic, right? So unfortunately, I think it's going to it'll probably legally be a need, whether you like it to be or not.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a need. I mean, now this goes back to like, if you don't make enough to be able to support all your needs, then maybe that might be at the bottom of your needs. Yeah, but it should still be in the needs category. You should be paying your child support before you're, paying lawn care or discretional spending. So yeah, I 100% agree with that. Yeah. What about other insurances like life insurance, homeowners insurance, anything like that?
Typically, the homeowners that usually is tied into your mortgage stuff. So that's usually a mandatory thing, kind of like your car insurance. But like, for example, life insurance, I look at life insurance as a protection kind of side of the plan, right? And the fact is, all these things that we're talking about and building generational wealth and income to last for years is all with the idea that we're going to live a long life. If something happens, and especially if you're married, so my thought is, if you're married and have kids, I think it's an absolute must. You should have some sort of just low cost term insurance. Just protect us that if something happens, our family can still get to the finish line, right? We don't have to sell our house. We don't have to go into debt. We don't have to, become homeless, nothing of the nature. When people die, the worst thing that I would ever want to do is have my wife have to go put a GoFundMe on Facebook when I could have just bought freaking $15 a month term insurance and taking care of my family. I call it a need because I think I'm a little too passionate about it, but that certainly, I would say, falls in the want category. for sure when it comes to just having that insurance. So if you're married or single, I think it should fall in the want category. If you're single, I would say it's a luxury, meaning it's something that you're willing to set up now because at some point you might have kids. And if you don't have kids, it might be something that you want to use just to protect and be able to leave some assets to whether it's your family or a foundation or so forth. So in that case, it might be a luxury. Also, insurance is a product of age. So the younger you get it, the cheaper it is. So getting it while you're young and healthy is definitely going to be the most cost effective. Where if you wait till now you're 42 and have kids, it is going to be a little more expensive than it would have been if you got it, in your 20s or 30s.
Yeah, I mean, I would go as far as to say when it comes to life insurance, especially like term life insurance, I'd put it
Yes.
in one category as long
Yeah.
as if there is someone who depends upon your income, then
Yes.
then I think it's a need, right? Because you need to take care of your family after you're gone.
Right.
So
I
I
agree.
I see how you can fumble it between the needs and the wants. I'd go ahead and throw it in the need category. But if you're single or if there's no one who relies on your income, then it becomes a want or even a luxury at that point because
Exactly. I agree.
it's not a necessity anymore. So, what about chronic medical costs?
Hopefully your insurance is somewhat covering that. I mean, one thing, for example, like having an HSA or FSA plan, a lot of people will have that through the employer where it allows you to designate money for medical expenses. So that's one that I think, if you are someone who is having consistent medical costs, having like an HSA or FSA account is a good idea because you're basically going to designate a specific amount of money you're going to have to spend every year for those medical costs. So I usually say just have enough money in that HSA to just cover whatever your deductible is. So if you have a $3,000 deductible, try to consistently make sure you're setting that out in your budget and putting away basically $300 a month because you're probably going to get that to that deductible every year because you might have some consistent medical conditions you have to rely on. So definitely something I say carve out, especially for people with families, right? That's another one of those emergency accounts where if you have a pretty high deductible, try to have at least that maybe in your checking savings as your emergency account so that if your kid gets sick or you get sick or you break your leg or something, you could cover that medical bill without having to go into additional debt.
Yeah, of course. And guys, he mentioned the HSA and the FSA. I just want to go over those real quick. An HSA is just a health savings account. It's a tax advantage account where you can put in X amount depending on your family dynamic and insurance and things like that. And then FSA is just a flexible savings account. They're about the same, except FSA, it has different rules where it can't be rolled over. I'm not going to get too far into those, but those are just tax advantage accounts that you can use to pay for health expenses. And it helps to save on your tax bill, essentially.
Yep.
So, what about gym memberships?
This is where my wife would be very mad. I have a gym membership and I don't use it. So if you're someone like me who's wasting $30 a month at Gold's, she literally made me go cancel it because I haven't used it in a long time. So obviously, yes, certainly I would absolutely call this a luxury because I mean, even during COVID, for example, we did a lot of free online workouts here at our house whenever it was just us and we certainly weren't going anywhere. So there's so many options out there that you could get free workouts and so forth to do at your house, whether it's just simply, I mean, something as simple as running, right? If you're not a runner like me, you could do some step ups and things like that out in the back porch. So absolutely a luxury. And if you're not using it, go cancel it. Don't be like me.
Amen, man. Amen. So what about clothing and shoes?
I would actually call this even less than a luxury, but I'm so different. I'm not somebody who uh if you looked at my wardrobe, I have my nice clothes because of course I have it for work. But outside of that, I'm just not somebody who looks at those as good expenses. I have one pair of dress shoes that I wear basically every day that are nice quality shoes, but I'll probably replace them every 5 years, Same thing when it comes to just normal clothes. All my workout clothes I've had since I got it for free when I was in college. So I would actually even say that this is probably a luxury. I mean, this is something in my opinion that I don't think we should spend a lot of money on because you wearing your $200 shirt. If I'm wearing a $200 shirt, the only thing I would be able to think about is, wow, this is $200 I could have probably put into my brokerage account or my Roth IRA, right? For the kids, absolutely. We understand that. If you have kids, you got to make sure your kids have, their onesies and so forth, So our budget when it comes to clothing and shoes is almost only solely focused around our kids' expenses or our kids' clothing just because they're constantly growing and so forth. But for me, I think this is probably one of the lowest things on the luxury totem pole.
Yeah, I 100% agree, man. There's only a very few exceptions, and that's like uniforms for work
Yeah.
or like your children. I mean,
Yeah,
having them
exactly.
kids clothes that they can fit, not clothes that are going to impress everybody, right? But clothes
Yes.
that can just at least fit. Like, let's hit that bare benchmark.
Let your family gift you that expensive stuff.
Christmas time, baby. So, what about home decor and furnishings?
Same thing. Typically too, once you move into your house, you're probably gonna maybe go that first few months of knowing you're gonna have to furnish it. But after that, that number should, if not completely stop, it should be pretty minimal. But this is another one of those things where we talked about the tracking and the budgeting. If you know you're about to move into a new home or you guys are going to purchase a home, you should already be saving for not only obviously the down payment on your house, but saving for these sort of expenses. You know that if I'm moving into a 3-bedroom house and I've only got a 2-bedroom apartment now, probably going to have to buy another bed, maybe have to buy a couch or something, right? Those are all things you could do, but this also segues into the idea of getting debt for a want. All home decor and furnishing places are more than happy to give you some sort of credit card to allow you to overspend, and buy $10,000 worth of stuff that you probably didn't need when you only needed 1,000. So also prioritize this and only spend what you know you can afford. Maybe wait on getting the additional couch and save for it versus going out to, I don't know, mattress firm and getting a $10,000 18% high interest credit card debt. So that goes into the don't go into debt because you have this because you think you want a luxury. This is absolutely a luxury that is not necessary in most cases, and you could plan for and actually save for throughout the year.
Yeah, man. I look back on like our journey between my wife and I as we, started buying home decor and stuff like that. And I mean, I remember we literally moved into our first apartment. We had a bed frame, a mattress, and a TV, and that was it. And then
All
one
they need.
paycheck, we went out and bought a dresser. Another
Yeah,
paycheck, we went out and bought a TV stand. Another paycheck,
perfect.
we went out and, it was just like incrementally we ended up
Yeah.
building. And now we have too much stuff to even
Yes.
we got to find room for stuff now. And that's always what I suggest people is like, you don't have to go out and furnish your whole house in one go. Like,
No,
be able to build up. Like, Rome wasn't built in a day, so your house
no,
shouldn't be either.
yeah.
So
Especially when you're on a fixed budget.
yeah, exactly. And that's the point of the budget, right? If you budget $300 this month to go buy a dresser, you're giving yourself permission to go buy the best $300 dresser you can find.
Exactly.
It's like it's giving you permission to do that.
Yeah.
And then the last thing we touched on a little bit earlier, but gifts. Like, because it seems like Christmas sneaks up on us every single year, right? Like, it
Yep.
changes days.
Same thing, plan for it. I mean, of course, people also, I think, tie gifts also into like tithing, for example. So there are some people who will tithe regardless of what your religious background might be. So certainly with that, something that even goes into the budgeting, right? People will segment a specific amount of their income that they give to tithing every month, and they do it without question, right? Same concept. If you build it into the budget, you'll most likely be able to stick to it. So with gifting, 100%, your kid's birthday, right? Or if your parents' birthdays or so forth. Those are all things that you can go back and look over the budget last year, see what you spent, and then from now, spread that amount over 12 months and start to save that and just start to get used to setting that money aside, knowing that that's money you probably are going to spend. I mean, a lot of times people don't like to give on that or kind of limit that, but that's absolutely a luxury. Giving your kid 100 gifts during Christmas versus 10 is definitely a luxury. I think as parents, and that's what we all want, and certainly something that my wife and I, same thing. We certainly struggle with of trying to maybe over gift to our kids just because we like to prioritize that, but definitely build that in the budget, just like the home decor. Those are all things you could build out. There's no reason to just wait till you get to Christmas and incur a JC Penney, credit card debt of 20 grand and then spend or layaway. That's still a thing, I think, right? Is layaway still a thing? Go put it
I
in
don't know,
layaway.
man. I haven't heard about layaway in forever.
Layaway is still a thing. Go take advantage of it. That's a thing where you're not getting that back until you pay it off consistently, right? So if that still exists, I hope they keep it.
Yeah, I mean, and I want to wrap all of this up by saying, guys, the point is, like, even if Joey puts, gifts in a luxury, but you think it's a want, or, you put child support in a want instead of a need, or however you decide to prioritize these things, you just have to prioritize them. Like, that's the whole point of this episode is, like, there are needs, there are wants, and there are luxuries, and they need to be treated as such. Like if buying a gift in December means you're not going to be able to make your rent in January, your priorities are messed up. That's the point of this, right? It's figuring out your income and building a life around that income and making sure you're giving, you're saving, you're spending, and you're doing all three. Because at the end of the day, I think the reason that budgets don't work is because of priorities.
Exactly.
And people cannot distinguish a want from a luxury to a need. Again, you do not need a $300 car payment. You do not need like to eat out multiple times. Like these are not needs. So treat them as luxuries and push them to the side. That's how you create an efficient budget and you end up saving money and investing for the long term and building, that generational wealth that we talked about.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that we didn't go over, Joey, that you think, you'd really want to hit on?
No, I think you finished off nice there of just saying it all comes down to the prioritizing things. And so I think if you make the choice to budget, you make the choice to track it and consistently do that, it's going to drastically help you and give you the freedom to go out and spend that difference, right? So carve out your savings, build out your budget, continue to track it, and then give yourself the decision to go out and spend it, right? Like you mentioned, you're giving yourself the opportunity to then go out and spend whatever that difference is. And you might get to a point where, now you're start making decisions where, hey, maybe I do have the permission to spend this money, but I think I'll save it, right? Our luxuries are at the point where we've covered all of them. There's not really anything that we are wanting to spend this month or this week. Let's go save it. So I think that's a perfect way to end it.
Yeah, I love it, man. And just always remember, guys, I know we might talk about some things that you don't think is possible for you and your specific, like 20%. That seems like a ridiculous amount of money to be able to save a month for some people. Here's the thing, right? They take that out in taxes before they even give you your paycheck. They take more than that out. Yes. So you being able to carve out less than the government does, it is 100% possible, but you don't have to start at 20%. You can start at 5%. You can go up to 10%. Then you can go 20. I've had people on who save 40, 50, 60% of their income. That's not a starting point, right? I love my episode with Joe, man, because he said something so profound. He's like, don't compare your beginning to our middle. Yeah. So just because I'm able to save over half of my income doesn't mean that you're supposed to get there. I didn't start at that point. I started at $5 a month, $20 a month, $100 a month, and I worked my way up. And I'm sure the same thing for you, Joey.
Absolutely.
It's like, so don't compare your beginning to our middles. All right. And yeah, all of our finish lines are different. Some people might get to 20% and they say that's enough. I'm going to spend the rest. Some people might not. They might get up to 50, 60, 70%. So, but all right, guys, we are going to get up out of here. Joey, I really appreciate you coming on, having the conversation, man. It has been wonderful. But without further ado, guys, I'm your host, James Bowman. And always remember, you're only as secure as your ability to perform. So spend your life accumulating assets that can perform for you. Later, guys.